Was Peter the first mega church pastor? That's what I want to talk about today. If you know anything about my story, you've been following the channel, you know that I am getting very intrigued with church history, specifically the church here in America, how it started and how it got to where it's at, specifically the non-denominational world, the larger church model, if you want to call it that. Some people don't like to call it model. Some people don't like to call it megachurch, but it is what it is. And it's one of the most dominant type of church structures, philosophies in America right now. I believe more churches consider themselves non-denominational now than anything else. And so it is something we need to talk about. And I consider myself a non-denominational, more Baptist. I'm a part of the SBC, so is my church. But I'm trying to track back how we got to the stage that we are at. And is that a good or bad thing? I'm trying to be unbiased about it and just really opening up Pandora's box to see what is behind it, because it doesn't seem to me that even the church structure that I'm in right now is not present throughout all of church history. And so what I'm doing is I'm putting my church model to the test, putting it to the fire, and seeing why did we come up with this structure, and is it actually better than what has come before it? Because a lot of stats would probably say not so much, and I want to interact with that type of data. So right now I'm watching podcasts, I'm reading books, I'm trying to learn about the church growth movement, I'm trying to learn about the seeker sensitive movement and comparing it to the church throughout history. And how does it compare? What did we lose? What did we try to substitute? What are things that we've thrown out that we really shouldn't have? What are the ways that we justify ourselves with these larger churches, these mega churches? And is that actually okay? And does it actually contest with church history? I want to say right now that I am not against large or mega or just numbers because they are big. I think that that's a common misconception, that you just want to attack something just because it's successful or it's big. And so I'm not necessarily focused on the numbers, but we are calling these churches mega churches, large churches, and I want to contend with those. And I know it seems like I'm bashing the mega church lately. I promise I have no bias towards it. I'm not trying to get clicks just to get clicks. This is truly what I'm interested in right now. And to prove it, as of right now, I do not take any money from YouTube. Even though this is a nice set, this is a nice camera, I don't think taking money from your creative endeavors is wrong. But here, for my own personal sake, I don't want to take any money from this YouTube channel, because I only want to focus on the things that I'm truly interested in and truly navigating right now in my own personal life. As I'm researching this, I just want to contend to you, and then getting to hear your guys' comments, getting to go back and forth has been so fun for me. And so I'm not trying to just go with the mega churches because it might be popular or it might get me more clicks. I'm not really interested in that. I'm interested in talking to the person that is on the other side of this, that might be going through the same thing that I'm going through. Maybe they're in a larger church or a non-denominational church and seeing kind of this philosophy or this type of church model, so to speak. I'm going to call it a model, but this model, and they're not as content with it as a young, maybe ambitious guy or someone who wants more liturgy. I am actively in this, and maybe I could reach across through this camera and talk to me as well as we try to navigate this together. It's just what I'm interested in, and I'm not taking money because I just want to make the videos that I'm curious about and dig into the subjects that I really like, and then I'm just presenting my findings. So I just did an interview with a megachurch pastor here locally. He has a congregation of 12,000 people, which is huge. He has multiple campuses all across Indiana. A lot of my friends go there. I attended the church at one point, so I'm very familiar. I was on staff at a megachurch. I've said that before. And one thing that I saw a lot when I was studying for the interview, I was listening to podcasts of other megachurch pastors and the philosophies of why they might say that having such a large church is biblical. And one thing they always point to is Acts 2, when Peter is in Jerusalem and he pronounces the gospel to this huge group of people. And it says on that day, 3,000 people were saved.
600, you're tossing a bunch of numbers. 688, 25,000, 3,000, man, it sounds like it's all about the numbers.
Well, we are 1122.
What'd you expect? What'd y'all expect?
I don't know, man. On the day of Pentecost, somebody counted.
Let's go to the passage right now. So it's here in Acts 2:41. So that those received his words were baptized, and they were added that day about 3,000 souls. And so on multiple occasions, I would come across in books or in podcasts, megachurch pastors pointing to this exact passage saying, hey, look, when the church first started, there were 3,000 people that were saved. Large churches, large gatherings, large movements of God are biblical. They are in the Bible. And so, of course, we should be able to grow large churches and actually have some biblical grounding, biblical foundations for that. And I was very curious about this. Is that true? Was Peter truly the first megachurch pastor in Jerusalem in the year AD 33? Is that real? And I obviously don't want to say that's not true. I mean, the Bible actually documents it this way, that 3,000 people were truly baptized and saved under the words of Peter. But what I wanted to contend with was, is that a model that we should follow? Did that actually stay that way? Was there a huge 3,000 person megachurch in Jerusalem for an extended period of time? And is it ever encouraged to be that big? Does it ever follow in church history that we had multiple churches all throughout our church history in bigger cities that were this big? So did it stay that way? And did church history try to repeat it? Those are the things that I was more interested in rather than trying to say that this didn't happen. It obviously happened. And so I continued to read, so to speak. And so there are a couple key points in Acts that I want to go to and try to figure out the historical context to what happened to these 3,000 people. Did it actually stay as a megachurch, so to speak? And so there's a couple key points. In Acts 6, they actually start to show that they're busting at the seams and the apostles are having kind of a hard time keeping all these people together and fulfilling the needs. And so we'll come back to that one in a little bit, but the other two were Acts 8 and Acts 21. And so I want to read from Acts 8 first, and then we'll go to Acts 21 and try to slowly start to work through the historical background for what was happening with this large church. So one thing that I knew right off the bat, just from my study of the Bible, is that Jerusalem was a hotbed in the first century for Christian persecution. It was not a friendly place to Christians, and it's not really a big place. If you've ever been to Jerusalem or seen pictures of Jerusalem, it's a relatively small place. And so it's not like you can have a huge gathering of 3,000 Christians when Romans don't like Christians and the Sanhedrin just killed Jesus. And so it's not like an awesome place just to hang around. And so one thing I thought about was, obviously in Acts 6, they did start to add people to the leadership so they can tend to the needs. But then right after that in Acts 7, Stephen gets stoned for his faith. So he gives this big long speech and it's all great. And then all of a sudden they kill Stephen, and he's known to be one of the first martyrs of the Christian faith. And then we get to Acts 8:1, where it says, Saul approved his execution, and then arose that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they all scattered throughout the region of Judea, Samaria, except the apostles. And so we see in Acts 2, we do have this large number of people. By Acts 6, we can see that it's starting to get too big and needs need to be filled. And then by Acts 8, which we know happens within a relatively short time period because Paul gets saved right after this. But we see that by Acts 8, there is a scattered people all across the region, not in Jerusalem anymore. And so what do we do with that? Do we still try to say, well, 3,000 people were great. They did do everything in common. There was a time period where 3,000 people were a part of a church. I guess that's up to your opinion. In mine, that's not a super strong justification for having these mega churches all across the country. It doesn't seem like that was a really good model to base your church off of, or something that stayed around for a super long time. I do want to answer some objections. Some people go back to Acts 21, where it says that Paul visits James in Jerusalem, and in verse 20, it says, and they said to him, you see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews of those who believed. Now, I would just use some context and say that because I know that they are scattered in 8, that he might be saying that through the ministry of Jerusalem, that Jews have been saved, and there have been thousands of them while Paul was gone on his mission trips, that there have been cycled of all kinds of believers that have come through the church in Jerusalem. And I would use even further context for this, because you see in James and First Peter, they are writing to the churches around them, and they wouldn't be writing to their own church if they were in Jerusalem. It doesn't seem that in Acts 8, when there's persecution and they go all around the regions and they go ahead and establish other churches, they have elder boards, they have pastors, and then all of a sudden they would just come back together to make another megachurch in a place that is hostile towards them. There is outright persecution in Jerusalem, and that does not go away. I mean, we see that Rome kills most of the apostles. We have Peter and Paul who die in what we believe in Rome. And so all throughout the first century, all the way up to the 60s and 70s, it seems as if Christians are being persecuted openly. The Sanhedrin, the Jewish leaders, do not like Christians. And so for us to think that just in the middle of Jerusalem, there are thousands of Christians just kind of walking around normally, it just doesn't seem that plausible. And that also we have James and First Peter who are writing to the churches out. Why would they be writing to a church that they're already a part of? I don't see that. But we see James here. He said to the 12 tribes in Dispersia. And scholars believe that he is writing out to the regions of the scattered Christians. We have in First Peter to the exiles in Dispersia and Pontus and Galatia. And so we see that they're writing towards people that are out, and they're trying to build them up in the ministry, trying to build up the leaders, the pastors. And so I just don't see it that way. I see Acts 2 as an amazing work of God. The Holy Spirit was obviously there. 3,000 people get saved, but it doesn't stay that way. It seems as if the Christians get scattered, they go to the surrounding regions, and then they're persecuted. And so they start to just do small local churches all around Jerusalem, but there's not really a megachurch that's super established and that stays for an extended period of time. And so I just don't know if that's a really good example of why we should have megachurches. It just doesn't seem like there's enough evidence there for that case, and to build an entire church philosophy off of something that just doesn't historically stand very long. But that would just be my personal opinion. And then one little caveat, like I talked about earlier, in Acts 6, it says that they are having a hard time filling the needs. And so this is a kind of fun exercise. There are 3,000 people who are saved, and you have the 12 apostles, which are the most incredible dudes possible in the Christian faith at that time. They're the best leaders. They got to literally be under Jesus Christ and get all the wisdom. The Holy Spirit is on them, and the church is moving, and they're having problems. And they only have 3,000 people. And some of these churches in America have like 20,000 people in multiple satellite campuses. That is crazy. And so the 12 apostles couldn't even handle 3,000 people, as we see in Acts 6. And we think that we can just build these ginormous congregations all across the city and then somehow be able to navigate their needs and their spiritual maturity as well. And so I think that's just an interesting exercise. So even if we do say that there's a megachurch in Jerusalem, it seems like the 12 apostles had a lot of problems with it. And so is that something to mimic? But I wanted to even take it a step farther, because what if the persecution in the first century was just so bad? The apostles obviously died. There are a lot of things happening to the early church that, of course, they can't have big churches in the big cities. It's not grown that much yet. And so what does church history say about this? If this is actually a good thing, if Acts 2 is something that we should look up to, a large congregation of 3,000 people, that is something that we should aspire to, because that's what the apostles did. That's what the early church did, but they just couldn't because they were in persecution. That means hopefully throughout church history, we would see it replicated. We would see that large churches would be somewhat of the goal. Like that would be something prevalent, right? Turns out not so much. So I really focused on the first 3 to 4 centuries of the early church. And did they ever try to replicate that again, where so many people were a part of one congregation? And I did not find much. The average church attendance throughout the first 4 centuries was about 100 people. A lot of churches were about 50. Some of the biggest top cities across the ancient world maybe got up to about 300, but that was it. And we only see one time in the first 4 centuries where a church actually gets over 500. And of course, it is in Rome right after the Edict of Milan, when Constantine makes it the official religion of Rome. And we see that obviously that church is huge. I think it could hold up to 1,000 people, but the average attendance was somewhere between 500 and 750. And so we don't see it happen very often. In the first 4 centuries, where the church would have tried as best as it could to take the practices of the apostles, we have the church fathers, the apostolic fathers at that time, and they never really tried to get back up to that many people in one congregation. A lot of them were just 100 people, maybe. Maybe you would get up to 300 people, but never, ever 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000. It was just completely unheard of in even the biggest cities throughout the ancient world. And then I even took a little bit of a look past that, and I saw that literally the biggest churches were around 1,000, and that was in the biggest cities on the planet. And it never really got past that. I did not find anything that was like 3,000 or 5,000. It only stayed around 500 to 1,000, almost no matter what. So hopefully you found that a little bit interesting like I did. I just had heard that so many times. I'd heard Acts 2 quoted, but I was just kind of curious to see if anyone actually replicated that. Is this truly like an American lens of like we love big, we want to be this large congregation, we have these amphitheaters, and it just seems like a very American thing to do. And then were we just taking that and reading that into Acts 2, or did history actually replicate that and try to do it over and over and over again? And I was just very curious to know the answer. And it just doesn't really seem like we did. Church history does not seem to lend itself to this mega church model or huge congregations of people, but it tended to stay relatively small communities all across the cities. I see that as a little bit more healthy of a model, but I'm still navigating what I feel about all this. But I just don't know if Acts 2 is the justification that the mega churches could really use to build their case. Again, not saying that large or mega churches are bad, or just because it's a large number, we just have to throw it out. But I do believe that we need to come up with some better answers, because I just don't know if Acts 2 is our full answer. And so hopefully you found that intriguing. I don't ask this very often, but if you like these videos and you like what I'm doing, like, subscribe, comment. My favorite thing, honestly, is when people comment and challenge me and try to bring up something that I just don't know. I have learned so much on YouTube just because the comment section is so awesome. I don't know how else to explain it. Sometimes I get into some scuffles, but it's just because I love learning. I love challenging. I love to put my opinion out there and try to get some feedback. And so please comment, like, again. I don't say it very often, but subscribe. That would be awesome. But I'll see you in the next video.